Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be doing a quick review and walkthrough of this game here, Lucidity Six-Sided Nightmares. This is a great little 20 to 30 minute, 2 to 4 player bucket of dice game, or should I say bag of dice game. I picked it up a while back. I can't quite remember where or when, but I do remember that I picked the game up because it gave me some serious H.P. Lovecraft vibes, both with the art style and also the description on the back of the box. And so I ended up grabbing it, and it turns out it's actually a great game for a bucket of dice game. It's actually relatively complex, not so much so that it's off-putting, but usually these types of games, these little $20 to $25 dice-based games, can be a little simplistic. This one actually has a nice bit of complexity and some nice sort of atmosphere that it generates while you're playing it. So the game itself, the premise of the game, is that you and the other players, and it is a competitive game, are dreamers who are delving into a dreamscape in an effort to obtain power and become the most powerful dreamer. While you're in there, on top of competing against each other for power, you're actually being hunted by things called shadows, which are actually sort of nightmare creatures or nightmare spirits. They want to devour you in order to absorb the power that you've gained, and they can also corrupt you and turn you into a nightmare. In which case you can actually begin to hunt the other players, and you can win the game as a nightmare or as a dreamer. So that's actually kind of cool. You can win as a good guy or as a bad guy. The game itself comes with 80 multicolored die in this lovely little bag here. They are 4-colored, 6-sided die, blue, green, yellow, and red. And they do not have your regular 6 pips on them, 1 through 6. They actually have custom symbols on them. I will try to hold one up to the camera so that you can see. First symbol that you've got here is the hunt symbol. You can see it's kind of a little demon skull there. The next symbol is going to be the exhaust symbol. It's like a crescent moon with some Z's on it. Third symbol is going to be the shadows symbol, which is this guy right here. It's kind of an eye with some flames coming off of it. And then you've got the power symbols, which can be either 1 or 2, and they're sort of inside of a wreath, like a victory point symbol almost. Only the red die has the hunt and the power, the 2 power symbol. All the rest of the die have a combination of the other 3, either power 1, shadow, or exhaust. And so that makes the red die kind of the high-risk, high-reward die. I say that because the 4 colors have different layouts. All the blue die are the same, and then all the green die are the same, but if you compare the green die to the blue die, for example, they have different symbol layouts, so there's a different probability of you getting a different symbol depending on the color dice that you're rolling, and on some die there's 0% chance. Like I said, if you roll anything but the red die, you can't roll a hunt symbol, but you also can't roll a 2 power. And power is obviously what you're looking for, so that's the high-risk, high-reward die. Going over the rest of the stuff that comes with the game, you've got these lovely little cheat sheets right here. This actually lays out what I was just talking about fairly well. These are the 4 different die colors, and you can see that the symbols on those are not consistent across the 4. On the other side, you've got a nice little sort of turn layout. The top half is if you're still a dreamer. The bottom is if you have become a nightmare. Obviously, your gameplay style changes once you become a nightmare. Then you've got the 4, or actually 5 nightmare cards. You only play with 4, and the 5th one is sort of a advanced version if you want to slip that in. I'll show you these actually one at a time. They have some really nice dual art on them. And they are also color-coded to match the die. So this is the yellow nightmare, this is the nightmare of imprisonment. And you can see the art is different on the 2 sides, but the special rule listed down at the bottom, that's actually the same on both sides. So all that changes is the art. Then you've got the nightmare of the depths, that is blue. Like I said, I really like the artwork on these. It really helps bring the game to life once you start playing. The Nightmare of Envy is green, pretty fitting. And the Nightmare of Primeval Fear is red. Hopefully you guys can get a good look at those. The 5th one is the Nightmare of Temptation, and you can see that on one side it is green, and on the other side with the same image it is red. And that is because in order to fit this one in, you actually have to cycle out either the Envy the green Nightmare of Envy or the red Nightmare of Primeval Fear, and this one replaces it, so you play it on the matching side. The actual ability on the bottom obviously varies depending on the side that you have it on, because the ability and the nightmare is based off of the color of die that corresponds to it. I'll get into that when I get into how the game works. So those are your 5 nightmares. You're only ever going to play with 4 at a time, 1 of each color, and you generally don't use the Nightmare of Temptation until you've got a good feel for the game. Then you've got your player mats, or your player sheets. That's these guys right here. They're all the same. There's no variation from one player to the next, other than on these sheets on the other side, there is the single-player version of the game, which is called the Boogeyman. So each one of these actually has a large playmat for each of the 4 different nightmares. You're not going to use that unless you're doing single-player. We're talking about multiplayer, so we'll ignore that for now. So the multiplayer sides are all the same, and I'll try to hold this up so that you guys can see it pretty well, because this actually explains quite a bit of how the game functions. It's very well designed. So in the upper left corner, you've got the hunt track. If you fill that with 4 hunt symbols, you lose the game outright. You get devoured. Beside that, you've got the exhaust track. If you fill that with 3 of the crescent moon symbol, or the exhaust symbol, I guess I should call it, you lose power randomly on your power grid. I'll go over that when we get into gameplay, but it also ends your turn automatically. Below that, you've got the 3 sleep tracks. They are numbered 3, 5, 7, 4, 6, 8, and 5, 7, 9. That's how many die you're going to get to roll on your turn, and you sort of choose one of those each turn. Below that, you've got the power track. That's numbered 1 through 15. It ends at 15 because if any player reaches 15 power, it triggers the end of the game. To the right-hand side, you've got the shadow rows, and those are labeled and color matched to the die. So you've got the depths, envy, imprisonment, and primeval fear. Also the nightmares, I should say. If you fill any of those rows to the 3rd space in a 3 or 4 player game, or the 4th space in a 2-player game, you become that nightmare. So that's sort of all of the functionality of the game, other than turn order and assignment order, and I'll go over that now. So at the beginning of the game, when you're setting up, each player is going to take a player mat. Obviously, it doesn't matter because they're all the same, so just grab those. Each player is going to get a nice little cheat sheet here, so they have a reminder of the turn order as well as the breakdown of what the different die have on them for symbols. You're going to take the 4 nightmares that you're using. So in a starting game, you would take the 4 basic nightmares and you would lay them out somewhat towards the middle of the table so that all players can reach them, because you are at times going to have to put dice on those cards. Again, we'll get into that in a minute. And then every player is going to take one of these glass bead markers. You've seen these in a million different games, just sort of a standard gaming glass bead token. This is used to track which sleep track you chose for your turn. That's that numbered space. So everybody's going to grab one of those. You're going to grab a player mat, you're going to grab a cheat sheet, you're going to lay out the nightmares, and you're going to put all of the dice, which are referred to as dreams in this game, into the bag. The player who goes first is going to be the player who most recently had a bad dream, according to the rulebook, which I think is a pretty fun premise. I always like when games fit stuff like that in. You're going to give the bag a good shake. While doing so, you are going to decide which sleep track you want to use this turn. The way the sleep track works is it's how many die you're going to pull out of the bag, and therefore sort of correlates directly to how many die you're going to roll. The fewer die you roll, obviously the less chance you have to gain power. However, the more dice you roll, the higher chance that you're going to get things that you don't want and either become hunted and lose, or become exhausted and lose power and end your turn short, or become a nightmare. Now, it's not necessarily bad to become a nightmare, because like I said, you can still win the game that way, but you have a lot less agility in what you can do during your turn when you're a nightmare. Your options sort of become a lot more limited, however, more powerful. So it's an interesting trade-off. So I'm going to go the middle track, 4, 6, 8. You start by placing your marker on the leftmost number, which is highlighted white on your card, and that's 4. So I'm going to pull 4 dice out of this bag without looking, and if you aren't good at sort of feeling out the dice because they are a little small, what I like to do is pull out fewer than I think I need, and then you can always add to that. However, if you pull out too many, you can't blindly put them back because you'll know what you're putting back, so you kind of have to dump your whole pull and pull again. So it's better to pull fewer and add to it than pull too many. So I'm going to place this bag right over here for now. And so I've got my 4 die. Now looking at these die, I have to put 2 back. You always put 2 back no matter how many you pull. So I like the red die because that has an option of getting me the 2, even though I also have the option of getting a hunt. Looking at my little cheat sheet here, blue dice are kind of the weakest. They give you the least option or the least opportunity to roll power. Green and yellow are kind of an even split. So I'm going to dump the blue, because it's too weak, and one of these greens. So I'm left with a red and a green. I'll place those back into the bag, and I'm going to go ahead and roll these. Once you roll your die and you see what you get, I've got a green exhaust symbol and a red shadow. You are going to place them onto your, I believe it's called assigning them, onto your player sheet in a specific order. That's also listed on your little cheat sheet here. So resolving dreams, you go power, then hunt, then exhaust, and then shadow. And there's a reason for that. I don't have a good roll here to explain it. Let's go ahead and turn this exhaust into a 1 power. So let's say I rolled a green 1 power and a red shadow. That's a better example here. So first I place a power, so any power that I have, you place all of them. So I rolled one power, I'm gonna go ahead and place that down on my power tracker, starting leftmost as possible. So currently I'm empty, I'm gonna start at 1. If I was filled up to 5, I would place it on 6, etc. If you roll a 2 on a red die, you place it normally, but then next time you go to place a power, you skip a space. So that 2 literally takes up 2 blocks on your power tracker, so it does actually get you to 15 quicker. So I place my power, then I move on to placing any hunts. I did not roll any hunts. Then I move on to placing exhausts. I've changed my roll a bit, so I didn't have any exhausts. And then you move on to placing shadows. I've got a red shadow here. If I had rolled, or if I had more dice on my sheet at this point, I could actually burn power to re-roll any unassigned dice of that same color. So say this red die was a green die, or say I had a red die already in my power track. I can take that die out of my power track, doesn't matter if it's a 1 or a 2, and I can place it onto the matching nightmare, matching color. So if it was red, I would place it onto red, green, I would place it onto green. That allows me to roll any or all of the matching colored die of the one that I just sort of discarded. So that's one way of getting around things that you really don't want to place on your board. I don't have any matching colors right now, so I can't do that. I have to place this red shadow. I place it on the red shadow row. And again, leftmost. Keeping in mind if I get to 3, I become that nightmare, assuming we're playing a 3 or 4 player game. Whenever you place a shadow on one of the shadow rows, there's a special ability that gets triggered. For the red shadow row, Primeval Fear, the ability is you may, so it's optional, move 1 shadow to 1 hunt space. It doesn't necessarily say that it has to be from that row. So if I had a shadow row that was getting relatively full and my hunt row is still pretty much empty, I could move that over there as a safety. Now, I like the idea of keeping this here because my hunt row is empty, but I'm more worried about hunt, because you lose the game if you fill your hunt, versus Primeval Fear row where you just become that nightmare and I can still continue to play the game and try to win. So I'm going to leave that shadow there. Now I've placed all of my die from that roll. I'm now going to check and see if I've filled any of the rows, going again in a specific order, starting with hunt. I did not. Moving on to exhaust. I did not. Moving on to shadow. No full shadow rows. So now I can choose, do I want to end my turn or do I want to press my luck forward? If I press my luck forward, I slide my tracker from 4 over to 6, so the next number in the same sleep track. You can't change sleep tracks once you've started that turn. And that would be pull 6 die, put 2 back, and roll 4. My board still looks pretty safe here, so I think I'm going to go with that. So I take my die bag, I give it a shake, and I try to pull out 6 die. Again, once you get past 3 or 4 dice, it's very hard to sort of, I guess the term would be eyeball with your hand. So try to pull out fewer than you need. I've got 5 here. I'm going to reach in and grab 1 more, always at random. And there are some special rules in the book about if somebody pulls out too many die or puts back too many die, like essentially tries to cheat. The player to their left gets to sort of choose what they put back or force them to roll a die that they don't want to roll. I don't think those rules are necessary for the game to function properly. I get that it's supposed to be like a fun, like, haha, you did something wrong kind of penalty. But unless you're really experienced and the game's starting to feel too simple, I don't think you need to add that in. If you pull too many or you pull too few, just correct it. So I've got my 6 die here. I'm going to put some back. I like that, I like that I have a red. I want to keep that because I want to roll for those 2 power. I already said blues are kind of weak, so let's start by putting a blue back. And then I've got a mix of 3 greens, a yellow, and a red. Just for the sake of keeping diversity, I don't want to get rid of that 1 yellow, so I'm going to dump a green. That leaves me with 2 greens, a yellow, and a red. I roll those, and unfortunately I have a lot of exhaust here. So I've got 2 green exhaust, I've got a yellow exhaust, and I've got a red shadow. So right off the bat, if I place those 3 exhausts, my turn is going to end and I'm going to risk losing some power, so I don't want to do that. So again, placement order goes power, then hunt, then exhaust, then shadow. However, you can perform that sacrifice of a power for rerolls at any point in this assignment process. So I'm going to do that right now before I move on to the exhaust step, because no power to place, no hunt to place, next would be exhaust. I'm going to dump this 1 green power from my power tracker onto the green nightmare card, and I'm going to leave it with the 1 facing up. That's important for if somebody eventually becomes the green nightmare. I'm then going to re-roll any or all, I'm going to roll all, of my green die. I've now got an exhaust and a shadow, slightly better because now I'm not maxing out my exhaust, which is good. So now I go back to my placement tracker. Do I have any hunts? No. Do I have any exhausts? Yes. So I place this green exhaust, and then I place this yellow exhaust, both in the exhaust tracker. I'm at 2, so I'm still safe. Moving on, I then place any shadows. Now, keeping in mind the order that I place them in is the order that those special abilities on the shadow rows are going to trigger. So red would be I may move one shadow from anywhere to the hunt track, and green would be reroll one dream of the next player's choice. I believe that means any dream anywhere, on my board or in my unassigned pile. I don't want to risk that because they could screw with me in some way. So I'm first going to place, let's see, I'm first going to place the red, and that triggers, you may move one shadow to the hunt space. I'm going to move this red one that I just placed to the hunt space. It still stays on the shadow facing, even though it's now in the hunt row. It obviously counts for filling the hunt row, but you keep it on the shadow facing. Then I'm going to place my green shadow into the green row, and that says reroll one dream of the next player's choosing. Next player would most likely have me roll the green because they would want me to risk getting an exhaust. I would say they'd have me roll one of the reds to try to force me to roll another hunt, but that also risks me rolling a 2, which would actually benefit me quite a bit. So I would say they'd have me roll this one shadow here in the green row. I roll that and it becomes a power 1. I now get to place that in my power row. I've now placed all of my rolled die. I go back and I check to see if I've filled any rows. I have not filled hunt or exhaust or any shadow rows, so I'm good there. Now I decide if again I want to press my luck, which you're allowed to do one final time, or end my turn. If I press my luck, I'm going to slide this over and I'm going to pull 8 dice, put 2 back, and roll 6. I'm getting a little risky here with my exhaust row being so full, so I'm probably going to stop and end my turn. When you decide to end your turn, or if your turn is forced to end because you've completed your 3rd roll, you actually get 2 options. You can either remove 1 shadow die from your board, from the shadow rows, not an entire row, just 1, or you can remove all exhaust die. I'm going to choose that because starting my next turn at 2 is a little bit risky, and I probably won't be able to handle moving dice around and keeping myself, in the clear. If you do fill, well, I'll go over what happens if you fill your rows in a minute. So that would be the end of my turn. I would pass this bag to the player to my left and they would begin their turn. So filling the rows, if I do fill my hunt row, I'm immediately out of the game. I dump all my die, all my dreams back into the dream bag. I put my stuff away and I basically just sit here and watch the rest of the game. You are technically the next player for things like the envy effect that says reroll one dream of next player's choice. If the player to my right had that effect trigger, I still technically get to choose, but that's pretty much it. Other than that, we just skip my turn and we move on to the next person. I'm out of the game. There's no chance I'm going to win. If I become exhausted by filling all 3 exhaust die, my turn immediately ends, and what I have to do is put all remaining unassigned die back into the bag. I remove all my exhaust die, and I put those into the bag. And then I reach into the bag and pull out 1 random die. Whatever color that die is, I lose all power on my power tracker to the bag. Basically, it sucks them all away because I became exhausted. Whenever you remove power from the power tracker, make sure you slide all your other power sort of back down the row because you want it to be as compressed as possible, keeping in mind to leave space if you have 2s on there. If I fill a shadow row, I immediately become that nightmare, or I should say, when I'm in the check have you filled rows phase, if I've filled a shadow row, I immediately become that nightmare. You remove all die other than power die from your player board, put them back in the bag, and then you're going to grab the nightmare that you've become, the card for that nightmare, as well as any die that are sitting on it from people having spent them to reroll die, and you're going to place that card onto your player board. Here, I'll show you. You would place that card like this, filling the space that you would normally have your shadow bars. Any power die that it had sitting on it, you leave those on the facing that they're on, either a 1 or a 2, although the only one that's going to have 2s is Primeval Fear because only reds can roll 2s. And you're going to add them to your power tracker along with any power dice that you left there from when you just now cleared all your other ones, because remember, you keep your power dice. Because you're still in the game and you're still trying to get to 15. If you can get to 15 as a nightmare, you trigger endgame scenario the same as if a dreamer gets to 15. The only difference is what you can do during your turn. So once you become a nightmare, during your turn, you basically have 2 options. You can either consume power or you can send minions. If you choose to consume power, you choose any single color that corresponds to your nightmare. So again, if I was red, it would be any red power die off of any player's board, and you simply steal it and place it on your own. So that's how you gain power and deny them power at the same time. you can also choose to send minions. If you send minions, you reach into the die bag, you pull out one random die, and you hand it to a player, and they have to roll it and assign it to their board. So you're basically trying to screw with them by giving them something that might mess them up, you know, finish out a shadow row or exhaust them or something like that. It's a way of sort of attacking them. The final thing to keep in mind is that once you're a nightmare, that special ability on your nightmare card, which varies from one nightmare to the next, though they are similar, is always in effect. So looking at Primeval Fear, it says, when any dreamer would resolve, which means move from their unassigned dice pile to their actual board. When any player would resolve a shadow or a hunt on a red die, a Primeval Fear die, move it to your card as a 1 power instead. You sort of absorb it and turn it into power and add it to your row because you are the red nightmare. So them resolving that die is like it's empowering you. On top of that, then you may move a shadow on their card to a nightmare on their card. So not only are you absorbing that die and turning it into a power for yourself, but you're then kind of screwing them because you're chasing them down by moving any shadow on their card onto a hunt space, and if you fill them up on hunt, you devour them and they're out of the game. So once you become a nightmare, you're still very much in play. You're just playing sort of a different game at that point. Your strategy has to change. As far as end game goes, there are basically, I want to say, 3 ways the game can end. Firstly is if any player, nightmare or dreamer, reaches 15 power, and you realize that when you get to the check if you've filled a bar step. If a player reaches 15 power, each other player gets 1 final turn. And when you get back to that player that triggered it, you stop and you see who has the most power, and whoever has the most power wins. So triggering the end game doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win, it just means that you're likely to win. Another scenario is that if every player becomes a nightmare, as soon as the final player becomes a nightmare, you immediately stop gameplay, and whoever has the most power right then and there, so obviously after they grab the nightmare card and they move the power from that nightmare to their tracker, you just compare power between all the players, and whoever has the most power wins. The final sort of end game scenario is if you run out of dreams in the bag. Whoever's turn it currently is pulls whatever dreams are remaining, rolls them, assigns them to their board, and at that point the game stops and everybody compares power to see who's won the game. I think the game plays pretty smoothly once you get a feel for it. The box says 20 to 30 minutes. I honestly think it's closer to an hour for the first time or two that you play it, but once you get a feel for the sort of mechanics and the flow of things, it's very easy to move through your turn. You start out, okay, I'm gonna pull 4, 2 back because you know which dice you like, or you're looking at your board and you're going, okay, well, I'm almost maxed on green and yellow, so I obviously don't want to roll any of those, so let's put those back in the bag, or I'm almost maxed out on hunt, so now we're gonna avoid reds. It's very easy to sort of find your technique once your board starts to naturally develop and you realize, okay, I gotta avoid that, I got space over here, let's try to lean in that direction, things like that. So it's an easy game to get a feel for, it's an easy game to sort of start to develop a technique or a skill set for. And it's really good as far as generating an atmosphere of tension. Like when you're rolling die and you're deciding whether or not you want to end your turn or move on and roll more, you start to feel a little pressured, like, oh, I'm not really sure what I want to do, this is really risky, and you know, it can get a little tense. As far as becoming a nightmare that somebody has already pulled, you can't. Obviously, you just continue to place shadows in that row. So say somebody had already become the Nightmare of Depths, which is blue, and your blue row hits 3. Nothing happens. In fact, you can continue to place blue shadows there infinitely. You just go right off the side of the board. That's what it says in the rulebook. You don't just stop when you hit 3 or 4, you just keep placing them right off the side of the board, but you never become that nightmare because somebody has already pulled it. Chances are you resolving those blue die is going to trigger that player's special ability anyways, so I doubt that it's going to just, you know, be a free place to dump die. But that's what you do if somebody's already pulled a nightmare. That's pretty much the entire game. It's pretty straightforward. Like I said, it has a bit of a level of complexity beyond most bucket of dice games that I've played, which I like, but it's not so complex that it's off-putting. I really like the artwork. I really like the theme, the dreamers and the nightmares trying to, you know, power grab. And I like the way that the rules are laid out in-game. It's very clear, it's very easy to follow. Between the cheat card and what's actually printed outright on your board, you pretty much never have to reference the rules. It's really well designed. I like the oversized player cards. I always like oversized cards. And it's a cheap game to pick up. Like I said, I think it was $20, $25. So it's definitely worth checking out. Again, Lucidity, Six-Sided Nightmare. If you get a chance to grab it, definitely grab a copy and enjoy. Thanks for checking this video out. If you haven't yet, go down below, subscribe, set your notification bell to all so you get pinged whenever I put videos up, which is Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 3 o'clock. Yeah, leave a comment, leave a like or a dislike, and I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.